This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends in Sulphur, Oklahoma. We're interviewing in Sulphur in April the 6th, 1976, Mr. Oscar Lowrance. And I believe I'm spelling it right. It's Oscar K. Lowrance, and Lowrance is spelled L-O-R-R-A-N. L-O what? L-O-W-R-A-N-C-E. Lowrance, Oscar Lowrance. Mr. Lowrance has been around a long time in this Sulphur area, and his father, I believe, was possibly one of the very early settlers, white settlers in this area. And we'll be visiting with him about the early days, particularly in the Sulphur area. We'll also be talking about his experiences with rodeo and other things, and the state legislature, I believe you were at one time in. Yeah. So, Mr. Lowrance, to begin with, I wonder if you would tell us who your father and mother were and how they happened to come to this part of the country.
My father was raised in Tennessee, and he went to Texas in the early days before the Indians was civilized. And then during the war, he served in the army up in the Choctaw Nation. And he liked that, and he had a lot of property in Texas, had 10 acres where the Union Depot is now. And he got sick, and he liked Oklahoma, and so he didn't know nothing about law, and he gave his cousin of his power of attorney to sell his land for him. He had 10 acres where the Union Depot is at Fort Worth now. But he sold it, but my daddy never did get any out of it. So he settled in the Choctaw country. Well, he made his living. He'd buy lumber and haul it up here and sell it or swap it for heifer calves and brand them and turn them out, in the early day.
Your father was in the Civil War?
Yeah.
Was he in the Confederate Army? Or
Yeah, he was drafted in the Confederate Army.
Confederate Army. Who did he serve under? Do you happen to know?
No, I don't. I've heard him say many times. But it was just a small outfit. Most of the army did. They went up in the Choctaw country and watched the Northern Army baling hay over in Fort Smith, and they was kind of on the watch out. There wasn't much of an army, just a bunch of men straggling along. But Daddy didn't believe in war, and he'd tell his captain, the rest of them wondered they hadn't shot him. He said he didn't believe in war in the first place, and he said that you split this nation up into two different nations. Some other nation would come over and catch them one at a time. He was against the war, so he served. They made him serve, but then he didn't like it.
Was he located in one of these southern Oklahoma forts?
Huh?
Do you know? Was he located in one of these southern Oklahoma forts?
No, they just had a straggling army that come up in the Choctaw country watching the Northern Army. And he was never to fort.
Did he ever tell about any experiences that took place during the Civil War?
He wasn't in the fighting. The main thing, his crew just come up in the Choctaw country watching the Northern Army. They was putting up hay in Fort Smith, and he wouldn't carry a gun. They'd give him a gun. He said he didn't believe in killing anybody, literally any other way. And they'd issue him a gun, and the way they'd march, they'd just straggle across the country. And first time he got a chance, he'd get in some old blacksmith shop and break the damn gun, and short to the captain. Captain cuts to throw it down. Some other fellow bring him another gun. He said he didn't like it.
What brought him into this Choctaw country to begin with?
Well, he first went away out in western Texas, where the Indians were friendly until they got to stealing the settlers' horses, and they got to killing one another. And my daddy said the most gruesome sight was the Indians would kill a family cut a fellow's bed open and scattered the feathers. There'd be blood and feathers all over the house. And said one instant, neighbor to him was two little twins. They killed the whole family, but they didn't kill the little twins. Said they nearly starved to death when they found them. Said the fella took one under each arm, took them down the creek and watered them. And I never did know what was coming after that. He had a brother-in-law that he served plumb back in the eastern country. Had him moving, I don't know where all, in the army. But my daddy, them times he had hernia, and they did a long time before they'd take him. Finally, they took him, and he didn't serve in any fighting. He just was with a bunch of stragglers that watching the Northern Army about all day.
After the war, what did your father do?
That's a question that's hard to believe. They like to starve to death. There's nothing they could do. His father and mother was old, and he got the clocks all run down, and shoes wore out. He got to fixing shoes and fixing clocks so he could furnish clothes and something to eat for his old parents. And his belief that he didn't believe in war, and the Klu Klux got to getting in trouble. They killed most of the fellers that was against the war, you know, in the South. My daddy, his excuse was that if you tore this country up, made two nations out of it, some other nation would come and capture one nation at a time.
What about the Ku Klux? Now this was the early Ku Klux. What problems did he have with this early Ku Klux Klan?
Well, sir, they killed most of them that didn't. It was against the war. He'd get in the war, and he'd give him a lot of trouble. My father was a very religious man, but he had upstairs, and of the night he'd had a hole up in the ceiling, and he'd sleep up there had all kind of hatchets and guns and everything else in case they tried to take him. Now the only trouble they gave him, when he would be gone, the Ku Klux would come and get down the horse lot and whoop the troughs and holler like they were whooping him to aggravate his old parents, you know. But they wasn't but one man that ever, and so you'll understand, my father was very religious. He didn't believe in.
Well, I understood though that the early Ku Klux Klan was Southerners who were after the Northerners, and since your father was a Northerner.
No, he's in the South.
What?
He was in the South.
Yes, I know, but the early Ku Klux Klan was after the Northern Carpetbaggers,
yeah.
weren't they?
Yeah, my daddy said that they killed nearly every man that was against the South, was against the war.
I see. In other words, because he didn't, he was not for the South fighting. They were against him. Is that right?
No, his argument was that if you tore this country up, making two nations out of it, that a foreign country would come and capture it. And
sure.
He wasn't for it, and they wasn't against it. But the Ku Klux give him hell.
How long was this? Do you recall any experiences that he had? Any other experiences he had with the Ku Klux?
Well, about the worst thing they had was they'd either run ever Northern had believed in the war, had run them out or killed them. And they was constantly aggravating him, and one of them they killed him, but they didn't. And the worst thing they'd do and catch him away from home, his father and mother were old, and they'd get down the horse trough and whoop horse trough, and one of them would holler like him, you know, to aggravate them. And the only time that he had one Ku Kluxer come and asked him would he take his gun off and talk to him. Dad said yeah, and he took his gun off and put it in the house and come back out the yard. But he said he had a little dissecting knife he always carried in his belt. said this fella commenced talking, and finally, long-haired fella, and I guess he's about half grown, and he finally got to abusing my dad. My dad stood there and took it all. He's very religious. And finally, he had long hair, and he said he'd come over talking, this abusing him. And said finally that he couldn't stand any longer. Finally, he said he grabbed him with the hair and jerked that dissection knife out. Said he never heard a fellow beg like he did. He did. And he told her that time, so you better leave Lowrance alone, he'll kill you.
What year were you born?
In 1882.
1882. That would make you 94?
I'll call it 93, I guess.
93 now.
Yeah.
Now you were born in this area here, right around Sulphur, is that right?
4 miles south.
4 miles south.
Where the ranch you own now.
Why don't you describe this area as you first remember it in the 1880s?
Well, it was one of the finest country in the world. It was just one big pasture, and they wouldn't let men ranchman fence in the pasture. They wouldn't let a white man own land there. And the only way they'd get around that, they'd hire some intermarried feller and let him claim cattle and hold them in here. But otherwise they wouldn't let a white man own cattle in Indian territory.
How were you able to? How was your family able to? Did you have Indian blood?
Yeah.
Which side is the Indian?
My mother.
Your mother, and she's Choctaw.
No, Chickasaw.
Chickasaw. Your mother's Chickasaw. Is she full-blood Chickasaw?
Oh no. I never did know that. I always figured she's about a half breed, but she only registered as a quarter Chickasaw.
And your father married her after he came into this country, is that right?
Yeah.
Now what about Sulphur? What was here at the time?
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
There wasn't a house here. Well, there's an old pole house logged up that way that foreman used for a camp house when he was gathering cattle through the year. But that's the only house there in Sulphur. They had a picture a while back of that old house, but it wasn't one here.
So you saw Sulphur come from nothing to what it is now?
Oh yeah, I rode through here many times. Wouldn't be a man or anybody living here.
As you recall it, how did it start up? How did Sulphur start up?
Well, they got to having picnics over summer. And they'd have picnics and revival meetings, and the settlers would all come and camp here. And it just started from that. And there wasn't any house when I was born here at all.
I understood that your home was kind of a headquarters for a lot of the picnics and things, your all's ranch.
Well, I don't know if that's so, but there's one thing, and there's no one that's ever turned down for a meal or to stay all night at the old home place. And it'd be different characters. One of the most outstanding characters that I heard my mother tell about, some woman that she had pistols in her belt, big Winchester, and ride through the country, and they'd stay all night there. And they never did know who she was and where she was going. And they wouldn't turn anybody down. They'd go and stay all night, Oh.
Did you ever find out who she was?
No. Oh, she told us her name, and I forget what that was, but we had an old fellow working for us and had plank ceiling, and he had hit his pipe on one of them planks, and he called his pipe the same name of her. And my mother said one day, he said, well, I'm going to get old lady, what's her name, talking about his pipe. And my mother, she said she looked, that old woman go shooting every minute. She had a 45 belt on.
You never knew what the guns were for then, did you?
Huh?
You never knew what those guns were for then, did you? Can you think of any other interesting people that came through during those early periods?
No. I don't. When it came through, I knew more about the natives here. and the full-blood Indians. They were, my daddy always said they were the most honest people there was. See, when I was quite a boy, there wasn't, well, a white man could live here, had to pay a permit to live here in this country. And they finally settled up, you know.
What about the Sulphur Springs in the early days? Were they an attraction to people?
Not as I know of it. They'd have picnics here, and they nearly all the old settlers would come and camp here a month. I've always wondered about that. My daddy had an old campground where he'd come and camp for. How they got time to do that, I don't know, but they did.
Was it the Platte Park area where they camped?
It has been since. It wasn't then.
They camped in the area that's now the Platte National Park.
Yeah.
Maybe it was those springs that drew them to that particular area.
Yeah, they did most of the camping down there around where that Shed Spring is down the south.
About when did a town begin to come up here?
Well, now I first remember there wasn't any town. There was a little old store finally put in down at the edge of that hill.
You remember the name of it?
No, I don't think it had a name. And that was the only thing, beginning of any building here at all. In the early days, there wasn't nothing here, you know. I rode through here many times, got down to get me a drink of water, and there wasn't even inside.
You remember who ran the store?
No, don't.
You don't?
No.
What was it, a general store?
Always a little old grocery store of some kind, yeah. Now, they had a store at Mill Creek. I remembered his name, and before there's ever a store here, there used to be and I can't remember his name now, but fine old fellow on the store down there. They had one store in a gin at old Mill Creek.
Where did you go to school?
First to last.
Well, first.
They had little community schools. This fella come through and he'd teach his kids for $1 a month. And sometimes he'd have, as the time went on and more settlers came in, sometimes he'd have 60 students. He's a pretty rough outfit. He wasn't out, his school wasn't out 30 days till he killed a fella.
It was what now? His school what?
Wasn't out 30 days before he killed a guy.
Oh. What did that do to his school when he killed this guy?
Well, but school was out then.
Oh. Did it mess up his school or his attendance after he killed this guy? Or did
No, he never did teach no more.
That ended his teaching. Did he go to jail or was he convicted?
No, they had them days. U.S. school court was in Texas. They tried him, and I can't think of the no lawyer used to be here was prosecuting or was defending him. So there was a half nigger that picked cotton for this guy that killed this other, and he was got his wife to swear that she seen him doing unlawful things in the cotton field, you know, and he come cut out of it.
Well, where'd you go to school after that?
Well, we had a little old school at Buckhorn for years. Then in my high school, I went to school in Davis. Then they had a college. I forget the name of the college in Ardmore. I went to school there. My last school then was the University of Oklahoma.
Did you graduate from the University of Oklahoma?
No. I was getting along fine. You know, we had a bunch of cattle that you'd throw them in the stock field with Paul, and when Paul come, you had to do something with them. They'd go down and get in the field. And I came home one Christmas, and my older brother, he didn't like to ride. He had 2 men hard, and these old cows, they'd bring them up to the house and put them in the lot of the night, and then take them back next morning to the stock field. these guys had all the horses rode down, and they didn't know how to handle them. And I said, I'd get along fine in school. And I told my brother, I said, hell, I can handle them by myself. He said, well, if you think you can, you better come home and do it. I said, okay. I went back to Norman and packed my trunk. And I said, now you can put these other guys to flying. The way I do that, I'd have these cows in the stock field. I don't know whether you understand about the stock field or not, but they used to, after you gather the crop, they'd put the cattle in and clean it up, you know.
Oh.
And the way I do that, I'd stay with them, I said, until they'd all lay down. And if something didn't disturb them, they're safe then until the next morning. I'd go home then, go to bed, get up, get back to them before they get up, and I handle them by myself. Didn't need no help. But my brother, he didn't like to handle cattle. He's older brother.
Do you remember the name of the school in Ardmore?
Huh. Oh, I'm there.
Do you remember anything about it that might be worth mentioning? Anything that happened down there?
No. I don't remember anything that happened that's outstanding. I believe it's Hargrove College. I won't be sure.
The what?
Hargrove College.
Hargrove College. Do you remember at OU? What years were you at OU?
1903 and 4.
1903 and 4. Can you remember anything? Do you recall anything that happened? Why don't you describe OU as it was when you were there?
Just about, it puts you in mind one of these high schools now. That's just about how much it was. And it was a pretty good school. I'd get along fine. If they left me alone, I could have finished. But I really wouldn't need much more. I'd study in Latin and your grammar school, whatever you call your grammar.
English.
Huh?
English.
English. It was more than just you'd write articles and things like that.
Yes. Do you recall any of the things that happened on campus outside the classes itself? Any of the activities on the campus?
Well, I'd never seen or heard of a football game. And first football game, they play in Arkansas. And there's OU was a little larger than OU, other than Arkansas. And they had one fellow laying outside, they didn't know whether killed or not, another up in front of the main building. And they was all jumping up and down. I'd never seen a football game. I didn't know what the devil. And I thought they was all crazy. But the next year then, I just about as crazy about the rest of them.
Did you play football?
No.
But you were a rooter.
Yeah.
Where did they play the ball games?
They're on the campus. Well, it's hard to tell you where the campus was either now, but it was that close. They had only one main building then, and it was near it.
No stadium. I presume
No.
you were just standing on the sidelines.
Oh,
right?
yeah. No, they didn't know what the stadium was.
Do you know who coached the OU team then?
No, sir. I got it. I can't remember.
That was before Benny Owen.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. I knew. I roomed with one of the players, and I should have remembered the coach, but I just don't.
Who was president of the university then? Do you remember that?
Well, yes. If I could just call it to memory.
You participated in rodeo. How did you become interested in rodeo?
Well, there's one thing's hard for you or anybody else to understand. This country at that time was one big pasture. There wasn't no fences or nothing. So people come from Texas and buy those Texas cattle and others and bring them north. Some of them would take them plumb up the Canadian River. And then they would turn them loose. There wasn't no fences, and by fall they'd be scattered clear back to Red River. Then every man that had a bunch of cattle, they'd send a wagon and a couple of hands and the horses south together. My daddy generally sent a man and a mount of horses with them to bring ours back. Ours go with them as they come through the country, you know. And I don't know, I don't specifically remember, there were 2 wagons that come through, and I was too young to go with the wagons, but I was pretty good cowhand. So my job was to sit out there at that old highway, and when a herd would come by, they couldn't keep cattle cut out, you know, and I knew all the brands. I was just a kid too, but I'd cut all the brands out I knew. That's how come I'd get the roping. You'd find still you couldn't breed the brand on, and I just rope and put it over and ride by him and step off, horse dragging to me, and then I'd pick the brand. And there's another thing I'd never been able to explain. Sometimes it'd have 2, 3 brands, one on top of the other. You could always tell which is the last brand, and I never did know how I'd done it. It'd be 2, 3 brands, one on right on top of the other. And you had to figure out which was the last brand and who it still belonged to, you know.
How did you, now you learned to rope then out of necessity to rope because they needed roping, but how did you become involved in the contest of roping in rodeo?
Well, the first rodeo I ever seen was a steer roping was at Oklahoma City when Roosevelt, his war was just over, and we was sitting down here, and he spoke from up there, and sit and watch those fellas rope steers. It's the first rodeo I'd ever seen. Well, it wasn't long till they had a little rodeo at Raw, and I went up there and I watched close how they did it, and they didn't even know how to tie a steer. So, old man Rolf, our brand was Mule Shuel. He lived at Raw. When I rode up and tied my horse, he come along, looked down that brand. He said, "Is that your horse?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Your name Lowrance?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "You gonna rope?" I said, "Yes." He says, "You ought to win it," and I did. First night I ever in.
This rodeo that when Roosevelt was here, that was 1900. Is that right?
I don't remember what year it must
That
be.
was when he was. Was that when he was governor of New York and came through for the Rough Riders reunion?
Well, it's just after the Spanish-American War.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I don't remember that he was governor anywhere.
Yes, he was governor of New York. What do you remember about that? Did you see the parade? I understood there was a big parade.
Yeah, I seen part of it.
Tell about the parade as you remember it.
Well, I don't remember much.
You were about 15 years old, weren't you?
I don't know. I must have been about that. I just after the Spanish-American War, and you can figure out himself. I never did that.
Do you remember do you remember anything else about that reunion? I understood he spoke out at the old fairgrounds, which was east of which was in the old military area of Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
That I presume is where you heard him speak and saw the rodeo.
I wouldn't know what it was.
But you don't remember the details of that.
No.
Other than the rodeo, is that right?
All I remember was we was at a building, and there was an upstairs to the porch, and we was downstairs, and he rode up to the side of that and flum up there and spoke from just over where we were sitting.
Do you remember the Rough Riders Ball that was held on Main Street?
No, I don't.
You do not remember that. Do you remember the encampment over on the Council Grove area? Do you recall that?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm. All you remember then was what happened at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, and I was just a kid then.
Yeah, I realize that. That was an interesting event. I thought maybe you would remember some other parts of it. Do you remember anything about the parade itself, the downtown parade?
No, I don't.
Why don't we talk a little about your additional rodeo experience? You won your first one at Roth.
Yeah.
What did you do after that? How did you go from there in rodeo?
Well, it was very scattered then, and we had no way to haul our horses. And about the biggest rodeo, the most outstanding rodeo was at Dewey. And I roped there every year. I won that one year. And that before they had bulldogging contests. We'd have these little rodeos, and I'd make a deal with the manager of the rodeo that I'd bulldog a steer for him. There wasn't any bulldogging contest then. I'd bulldog throw a steer and ride anything they brought in for a manner's fee. And so there wasn't any bulldogging contest, so and to rope a steer without a bridle on my horse. I turned my horse loose and rope a steer. It's for entertainment.
Bill Pickett at the 101 was given credit for inventing the bulldogging. Did you know Bill Pickett?
No, I didn't.
You never saw him?
No.
Do you recall any other rodeos? Now, you mentioned the Dewey Rodeo and the Rock Rodeo. Any other rodeos you particularly recall?
I roped in Calgary, Canada. I won the bulldogging up there.
What year was that?
1912.
1912. Now, you had been roping since about 1903, hadn't you?
I guess so, yeah.
About 9 years.
Yeah.
During this period, were you participating? I know that you didn't travel. You didn't have a car to travel much. So that's the airplanes that they travel in now. They'll go halfway across the country from one rodeo to another. But did you compete simply in rodeos in a limited area, like 50 or 100-mile area?
We're like McAlester now. We'd ride the horses down there and rope with them. I think that's about as far as I ever got away with McAlester.
Well, Dewey's farther than that.
Yeah, but we shipped my horse by train then, but McAlester we rode him the other day.
I see. You traveled by train to the Dewey Rodeo.
Yeah.
And I presume you traveled by train to the Calgary Rodeo. Did you have to qualify to get in that Calgary Rodeo by winning a certain number of other events?
No, it's open to the world.
Anyone that wanted to get entered?
Yeah, I entered the bulldogging and the bronc riding, bareback bronc riding, and the steer roping.
All three, and you won bulldog.
No. Yeah, I won the bulldog, but I placed in the first ride in the bronc riding. But the next horse I got, he slipped down with me, and you couldn't win on a horse wouldn't stand up with you. I could have won it, but I had to get another good horse.
Did you win any bronc riding contests?
No.
In other rodeos?
No.
How many took part in this Calgary Rodeo?
Oh, I believe the estimated. You mean it to the roped, or you mean or the public?
Yeah, everything. No, I know how many participated. How many in the Calgary riding or roping or whatever it was.
I just don't remember. Now we had 3 Mexicans up here. One of them was a trick roper, and one of them was a bulldogger, and I forget what the other one was. It's out of old Mexico. But we'd have a pretty good bunch. I just don't remember. I got a picture in there where I won that Dewey roping, and I got this big long picture, and we all sitting down there in front, and I won the money, and they paid the prize in gold, and I brought it home in one of these little old tobacco sacks.
In gold.
Yeah.
What would the Calgary? Now that's the international contest. What was your prize in that contest when you won first in bulldogging?
$500 in belt. And $500, a saddle, and a belt with a gold plated with my time on it.
Do you still have the belt?
No, my old home place burned down, and it burned down.
Oh, that's a shame. It ought to be in the Cowboy Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it couldn't be. It hadn't that old house burned down and melted all.
Do you have any of the relics of your rodeo days?
Oh, I don't guess I do.
If you do, they ought to be in the Cowboy Hall of Fame, you know?
Yeah. I got one belt in here that they give it to me for winning a steer roping somewhere. I don't remember where, but just a small outfit.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what year it was? Did it say?
No, don't.
Mm-hmm. Did they keep records of champions, world champions, back in those years?
No, that is something that didn't matter what you did. Now, Ellison Carroll was claimed to be champion roper of the world, and he was a good roper. And one day I tried to steer over a 40-foot score line in 19 seconds. Had won the money. That night, old Ellison hunted me up, sit down in front of me when I was eating supper at the hotel. He said, Oscar, he said, that's the fastest steer I ever seen tied over a score line. He said, now I claimed 17 seconds, but he said, I followed the steer out of the chute. He get it down that time.
Mm.
But he was a good roper.
Mm-hmm. The after the Calgary, did you have any other big rodeos? Did you enter Calgary again after that year?
No. I kind of dropped off on steer roping. I raised a bunch of boys, and I just afraid that maybe it wasn't good for them. But the hell of it is, I raised a bunch of ropers then. They went to a little old rodeo over Davis, and they wanted to rope. And I said, hell, you don't know about roping. So I built them a roping pen and roped with them. Well, I won it on the start. They didn't know about roping, but hell, it wasn't long till they set me out. And I've got a grandson now that's won some awful big rodeo steer roping lately. One in, I forget what places, I think one place out in Washington, one at Fort Worth, I think.
What's your grandson's name?
Ain't that the shit? Oldeston's Wayne, Southern's Don. Joe's his name.
Joe
Lowrance.
Joe Lowrance.
Yeah.
Has he been in the national finals?
No, but he's started won some awful big ropings. I look for him being the next one.
Mm-hmm. How old is he?
Oh, I wouldn't know. He was maybe 25 or 30 years old.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any bad accidents that you had in rodeo?
No, no, there wasn't. That I was there. Now you take Cheyenne. There's 2 different times people got killed, but then jerking horses down. But I didn't intend it. I guess I don't went, but some representatives of Cheyenne was in Calgary, and they said they'd not take that long distance. You had to rode your horses then, you know. And he said the Humane Society might stop him, so we never did go out there.
You never participated in Cheyenne?
No,
then? Mm-hmm.
we would have.
Outside of Canada, what others did you take part in that were a long way off, out of the state?
I guess Canada's about
the only one.
Yeah.
So the rest of them were in Oklahoma.
Not all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. About how many would you take part in a year? How many rodeos?
Oh, that'd be hard to tell. They had what they call the old man roping in Texas, and I went to that for, I guess, 18 years. I never did win it, but I got pretty close time or two, but I never did win it. It had a man over 60 years old, you know.
Would you say you played as many as 20 rodeos a year, or is that too many?
That's too many, I imagine. Some years I might have done that. Some years there's a difference, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did like to rope.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, now, so you'll understand, I was farming. I wouldn't start out roping until crops were laid by.
In other words, that was a hobby and not your business, like it is with the cowboys today.
Yeah.
It's their business.
I roped in Oklahoma City one time.
How would you compare the roper? Did you ever rope in the Fort Smith Rodeo?
No.
How would you compare the ropers of today with your ropers of your period?
Well, it's all different. It's all calf roping now. In them days, it's mostly steer roping, you know. Mm-hmm. And I don't know Oh, there's, if I can think, there's some of them that's still pretty high in calf roping, but not many.
Did you know Jim Shoulders?
No,
Of course, he's way behind you, but I just wondered if you.
no, I wasn't acquainted with it. Knew of him, though.
What was the most, other than Calgary, I guess that was the most exciting thing that ever happened to you in rodeo was Calgary. Next to that, what was the most exciting thing ever happened to you?
Well, I guess Dewey was this about the biggest steer open, and of course, what that impressed me, I won the damn thing. They paid it prize off in gold. I couldn't forget that. I got a picture of it in there.
And you put it in a tobacco sack.
Yeah, $300 in tobacco, little tobacco.
How many? $100? $300
in gold. And put in a little tobacco sack.
Well, now you served in the legislature. What period was this?
I think I was elected in 28, I believe. And I served 3 terms in the House and 1 in the Senate.
Now, in 28 was when Henry S. Johnston was governor. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you know him?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about Henry S. Johnston as you knew him?
He was a good man. Good man. He wasn't a governor, but he was, as a man, a good man. But he made a mistake turning his office over to Ms. Hammond. And they didn't none of the legislature like it. And that's how come to impeach him. I was there when they impeached him.
Did you vote for impeachment?
I voted for him in every bill, every vote, except I didn't. One was incompetent. He was incompetent, and I tried to vote what I thought was right when I was voting.
You felt that was the one thing he was knocked out on was incompetence.
Incompetent. He's a good man.
Yeah, but you agreed that that on the incompetence that they were right. Is that right?
Is what?
Did you say you agreed that he was incompetent? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, he was. He turned his office over to Ms. Hammond. It was disgrace. Of course, I got in there, and I got anything I wanted. But it's disgrace. When it got to where I wouldn't go to Governor Johnson for anything. She tended to it for her.
And you found that to be your experience, that you had to go to her to get anything.
The preacher got in with her, and I don't know how come he figured it out. I took this preacher down to Oklahoma City and bought him the biggest steak that a man could buy. And I noticed him eating that steak and look up at me every once in a while. And finally, he told me how to get into Ms. Hammond. Just me and him, and I don't know of anybody else. We just go to her door and put your hand up there, and they let you in. And I felt kind of funny one day. I put my hand up there, and the door opened, there's her husband.
There's a what?
Her husband was in.
Oh. You put your hand on the glass of the
Yeah,
door, and
yeah.
you see the hand?
Yeah.
That was the signal to get in?
Yeah. It opened up and let you in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, she ought to let me do anything. She ought to let me name a state highway engineer and all that. I couldn't find a man competent, and I didn't do it.
What was the significance of putting your hand up there?
Did she know who it was?
She'd recognize the hand?
That's one of her signals.
Oh, in other words, those that she was willing to give favors to, she told them how to do it.
Yeah.
By putting their hand up.
Yeah.
And those who were not in favor with her, then they didn't know about putting their hand up there.
No.
Well, now how about the first time you put your hand up there? How did she? Someone else had told her rather than she. Did she feel that you were using the password that you got from someone else instead of her? I mean, how did she?
I don't know just how that come up, but how she knew.
Mm-hmm. And so when you did that, she let you in, and you were a member of the inner fraternity, I guess.
Yeah, she didn't know anything at that. And not only that, she gave me a unlisted telephone number and told me not to call until they adjourned out the Capitol. Everybody leave, and then I'd call her.
How did she gain that much power in the governor's office?
Nobody will know. Just turned the whole damn thing over to her. But he was a good man at heart nowadays. But he was incompetent as the governor goes.
You know, I have a lot of him on tape, recording tape, that was recorded in 1939 at the reunion of the Constitutional Convention. He was a very dramatic person.
Yeah.
He spoke very dramatically.
He was a fine fellow. He wasn't an executive.
You know, his widow is still living. In Perry.
Yeah, we meet every 9 years to legislature. In the last meeting we had, I seen her.
We did a tape-recorded interview with her.
Ms. What's the other governor? Just poor Bill Murray.
Marlin.
Marlin.
No,
Yeah.
no. Before Murray was Marlin was after Tramp.
Well,
There was Johnson, and then Tramp, and then Murray.
then I guess the first. I remember Bill Murray didn't like me. He fought me, and he knew the family. And I had an older brother that drank, and he wrote a letter scattered all over this county. Said it wasn't best to send a drinking man up there. I'd take that letter and show it to my friends. I said, "You ever see me take a drink? You ever see me drunk?" No, I never seen it. It helped me instead of do it. And when he come down here and Bill Murray made a speech, and I told the fellow that brought it down here, I said, "You tell the little son of a bitch I was going to be up there." And, and I wouldn't go around him. So finally there'd be things that you had to see the governor for, and I'd go down there, and then the old bastard wanted to visit with me. And when I'd come out, there'd be senators and representatives trying to get into the governor's office, and we'd been just a visit him. Wasn't no business at all. And that kept on one to the other, and I never would ask him for nothing. Finally, he'd get to where he'd come up to the House of Representatives and get him a chair and sit down by me and tell me them old vulgar stories, them old mustache and whiskers of his that just stick you in the face. Oh, I come off from there telling him to get up and get out. And then I think to myself, I just can't afford to say that to the governor. To fight me, that we had this hospital out here, for the veterans. He was trying to do away with that. So I was on the appropriation committee, and he sent an old fellow down there that thought he mighty smart and told us why they ought to do away with this tuberculosis hospital here. And I asked him would he yield for a question. He did. I said, "Have you ever been down there?" And he said, "No." And so when I got through, I got up. I said, "Boys, you see what's happening. Bill Murray's trying to do it with that institution from some reason. I don't know. I guess again me. But I said, when those boys went to the army and their lungs were burned, most of them came down with tuberculosis, and the federal government hadn't provided nothing for them then, and the state built this for the soldiers. And God, they have a man on that committee. They took that bill out of the General Appropriation Committee and passed it to the understanding they wouldn't pass another bill till old Bill signed it. And so we passed it, and the old bastard signed it. He swore he wouldn't, but he did. He was a fine fellow. He wasn't quite as smart as a lot of people thought he was, but he was a good fellow. He didn't have nothing I wanted. I didn't fool with any appointments, A lot of them young fellows get elected and they go to government, and the governor will appoint their kinfolks or something. He gets a lot of votes that way. But on top of that now, he had enough men in the House. Any bill he'd put his name to, they'd vote for it. I don't know how in the hell he got them elected, but there was. And the only way I fought that is I didn't like to do it, but these other representatives, I'd go out on parties with them. They'd drink, and I knew how to stay sober. And I had enough votes I'd kill any emergency. He had a highway bill passed. He passed it all right in the legislature, but he couldn't put the emergency to it. And I had one of my friends, we voted that emergency down. And I guess what happened, they adjourned, and he called a special session to try to get that emergency, that highway bill. He wasn't in charge of it, you know. And some young fellow came to me, and he said, if you'll stay Lou Wynn, said, I can get in the white-faced cow business. That made me mad. But if they ever offered me any money for anything, I'd vote the other way. So I went right then into the bill was on the third reading that he voted on. And I told the floor leader, I said, bring your damn bill up, we're going to pass it. And we did. Bill love it. But we could they never could have passed the emergency if I'd just sat still. Them old boys. See, they'd come out there, gals, and they'd get drunk, and I'd stay sober, and I'd drive them home, and they wouldn't forget those things, you know. I didn't like to do that, but I was trying to make all the votes good.
Why did Murray oppose you? Because he couldn't control you?
Yeah, that's all.
He had nothing against you otherwise?
Oh, no, he's a good friend of the family. Always said he did.
Yeah.
But my oldest, he knew we were independent, and he didn't want the independent man up there. Man up there ahead of him, just doing the thing he said to, you know. And he knew damn well that I wouldn't do whatever he said to do. That's the only thing he had against me.
Can you recall any other, and Murray was quite a character, I mean, obviously. Can you recall any of the stories or any of the happenings of Murray that might be of interest, funny or otherwise interesting?
Oh, I don't know. He's hell on telling these damn vulgar stories, but I don't know of anything that really happened except on that emergency on that bill. He sure wanted that passed so he could take charge of the highway bill, you know, highway commission. And I had enough votes I could kill his emergency.
Did you serve as chairman of any committees?
No, Agriculture Committee, I believe it was.
Chairman of Agriculture.
I think so.
Were you ever an officer in the legislature?
Huh?
Were you ever an officer in the legislature?
No.
Now, you mentioned Johnson and you mentioned Murray. Now, between Johnson and Murray was Trapp, who came in, of course, when Johnson was impeached. Can you talk about him?
No, I didn't know Trapp.
You did not know him?
No.
Now, you were in the legislature when he was there, weren't you?
No.
You weren't?
No.
Did you have a split term?
Yeah, I started in 28 or 29, and there's a friend of mine said he'd like to run if I wouldn't run. So I said, well, I don't care anything about it, and I didn't run, he elected. And that's when Bill Murray was in. And so him and an old man was kind of trying to run politics in this county. I heard he said that if it didn't matter to me, if I hadn't run, he'd run. So I run and beat him. But he's always a good friend to me.
What was the most important bill that came up during the period you were in the legislature, as you recall?
Well, the main thing, now, when the first legislature that I was in, Homer Paul and Jim Lance and myself was over there together, and about all we did was to fight a bill we didn't think was right. We wasn't trying to pass no bill. But the most important bill for me now, I had a good friend who was defeated for a district judge, and I introduced a bill to create a new judicial district, and got it passed, and had my friend appointed as district judge. That's about the sorest thing I ever did.
Where was this?
Huh?
Where was where was this district?
His district. His district where he got beat was here. And I don't remember where they laid the district off, but they laid the new district off, you know, and appointed him district judge. Well, Marlin, Homer Paul, and brought a bunch of them high-priced, high lawyers from Paul Valley up there, trying to get them on there. And Marlin told him no. He said, if Oscar don't name the district judge, I'll just veto the bill, he said. Marlin's awful nice to me. And then Marlin, oh, she acted like she liked to dance with me. He'd have a couple of, 2 different times part at the mansion, me and her dance. She was nice. But I understand she's back. I'd like to see her back in the state now.
Mm-hmm. She was quite a bit younger than Governor Marlin.
Oh yeah, they claimed that he raised her and then married her.
That what?
He raised her and then married her.
Yes. She was. How old was she about that time?
I don't have much idea. I imagine in the 30s, 30 something. She was a nice little old woman.
She liked to dance.
Yeah.
You recall anything else about her that might be of interest?
No, I don't. That's about the only time I'd see her, when they'd have a dance at the mansion, and her and I do most of the dancing. But, I don't remember anything else.
I wonder why she disappeared.
Had no idea. And what I'm wondering about, what the hell she does now that back then.
Well, she came back, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe if she knew you were here, well, she'd go out to dance. You know, she hadn't gotten out of that apartment, and you ought to let her know you're here and invite her to a dance.
Yeah, well, I would love to, but I didn't know where to get a hold of her, and then I wouldn't know where to dance her. They, some of them thought I knew how to dance, but I didn't.
Do you recall any other legislative happenings that might be of interest?
No, there's plenty that happened, but I can't recall right now that we had a big tussle over.
What do you recall about Marlin as an individual? Can you think of anything about him?
Yeah, I think he's a fine man.
Can you think of any experiences dealing with him that might be of interest?
No, the only thing that that I had with him, I was in the Senate, and he was elected. No, I was elected in the Senate at the same time he was elected. My district ran near the Red River, and that's about the only thing that I remember on. He was mighty nice to me. Paul Colbert, you might have knew him. He used to be on the Board of Affairs.
Colbert Dairy?
No, Colbert. He had his ranch near Mill Creek.
Yes.
And he'd spent right smart of money on, and he was a Republican, and he spent right amount of money on Marlin's election. And so he come to me and wanted to know if I wouldn't call Marlin for him. I said, yeah. So I called Marlin, and Marlin, Homer Paul and Jim Nance been up there and started talking to Marlin, and said the old son of a bitch wouldn't talk nothing about on breeding dogs, and I didn't know. And they come back home, and I didn't know that happened, so I called him, Governor Paul. Told him, I said, Governor, would you remember personal friends to you and me in your appointments? He said, I'd do that, Oscar. He said, what is? I said, I'd like to appoint Colbert on the Board of Affairs. I said, he's a Republican, but he spent a lot of money on your campaign. He said, will you accept him as a Southern appointee? I said, I will. He said, I will. That's all about that.
What are other highlights of your life? We've talked about your rodeo. We've talked about the legislative period. Can you talk any or about some of the people involved in the growth of Sulphur area?
But the greatest thing I can say to you is this. My father elected me to the legislature after his death. I don't remember even filing to the legislature, but there was a preacher and next county commissioner and some other fellow running for the legislature, and I don't remember even filing. I didn't print no card, and I even say anything about it on it. I told him I didn't care nothing about it. And Damper wasn't elected. Now, my father elected me after his death. Just everybody, so many people knew him, knew he was a good man. If they knew how sorry I was, probably wouldn't voted for me. But they voted for me on account of him.
Well, how long had your father been dead when you were elected?
Oh, he died in, I guess, in 16. And that was 28. That's about in 10 years.
Before you, who filed for you?
I never did know. I didn't remember filing, but I must have had to, but I didn't remember it. I didn't know they ever filed. And they asked me about it, and I told them I didn't care nothing about it. I said I didn't. Then, after I was elected, I thought then I'd have a terrible time shedding this cowboy stuff, so I bought me a big high-priced set of suit of clothes. Some guy bought me one of the high-priced pair of shoes, and I bought me one of these little jelly bean hats. And I thought I'd slip in on them. I thought I'd shed this cowboy stuff. Hell, I wasn't there 3 days. They called me cowboy.
Well, this cowboy stuff is what gets you elected.
Yeah. Well, might have been partly, yeah.
Cowboy Pink Williams changed his name to Cowboy.
Yeah. How in the hell he ever got elected? I never could.
But he changed his name to Cowboy. That's how he got elected.
Yeah.
Did you know, how about Roy Turner?
Awfully good friend of mine.
Can you tell anything about him?
I think he's one of the best men, one of the best friend I ever had.
Do you recall any experiences with him, anything about him?
I did not as governor, but it was during the Depression, and I sold him some land down, bottom land, all good land, where you can irrigate and everything. And I never did appreciate it much. I went up there one day to go to lease it from him. He said, "Let me sell it to you." And he sold it to me then for $100 an acre, and I said, "How much interest?" And he said, going interest is 6%. I said, "Well, you figuring on buying my wife's place up there in Oklahoma City?" I said, "She'd be glad to have it. It's 5%. It's 6%. At 6%, I mean." He said, "No, hell, that's too high. It'll be 5%. I said, "Okay."
Any other of the governors that you were close to?
No, that's about all of them that I. And I never did go see what's his name when he's governor?
Marlin?
No.
Phillips?
No. Oh, I served in the House with Philip.
Yeah.
Boy, but I never did go down while he was governor. But now that's how bad my memory is. He called his name a while ago. He used to have this big Turner.
Oh, Turner.
Turner. Yeah. I never did go to his office while he was governor. It didn't bother me. He did. I know he done most anything I wanted him to.
How about Kerr?
I never did know Kerr very well.
You think of anything else in your life that we ought to talk about that we haven't?
No. But the only thing that I can say, I have the best wife in the world. I got a bunch of boys that worship me. They do anything I want them to.
Is your wife living?
Oh, no.
Yeah,
I'm back now in this damn place here, and I get so lonesome.
Yes, I bet so. This is concluding with Oscar Lowrance. You said you tried to get married a few years ago, and tell about them putting your age in the paper.
Yeah. And
What happened?
the women won't have nothing to do with it. They found out I was 92 years old.
Well, maybe you find a 91-year-old woman, you know.
I'd take anything. I'm bachelor right here in this damn house here, and I get so tired. And I've been used to being before the public, you know, and Rodeo and in the legislature. Now I'll sit here by myself, and I'll tell you it's rough.
This has been an interview with Mr. Oscar Lowrance of Sulphur, Oklahoma, a former rodeo international champion at one time, and for 10 years a member of the legislature and one of the pioneers of this area. This is Penn Woods concluding the interview. This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. We're in Medford, Oklahoma, and I'm visiting with Mr. T.H. Hall. And what does T.H. stand for?
Thomas Howell.
Thomas Howell, H-O-W-E-L-L?
Right.
Mr. Hall is now retired. He has been a businessman in this area for a long time. He was one of the organizers and the first president of the Medford Chamber of Commerce and was the first city manager of Medford after they turned to the city manager form of government. He retired as city manager about a year ago. Mr. Hall, usually to begin with in these interviews, we ask people to tell us a little of their family background, who your father was, what your mother's maiden name was, and how they came to the Oklahoma Territory.
My father's name was Lum H. Hall. My mother's name was Casey Cleon Parrish prior to marriage. They came to Oklahoma in about 1934, 33 or 34 to Marlow, Oklahoma. My father was a Baptist preacher. And being a Baptist preacher, he moved around to a number of different churches in the state and was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Medford, Oklahoma when he passed away in 1957.
Mm-hmm. You grew up in the Marlow and Medford area?
No, I grew up primarily, and I was only in Marlow a short time. I was there my senior year in high school, and then I left Marlow and wasn't back there anymore. Soon after Marlow, I went back to, finished high school there. I went back to Tennessee for 1 year of college. And in the meantime, the folks had moved to Elk City. And then I attended college at Oklahoma Baptist University 1 year. And then have been working since that time. Got married then in 1934. And soon after that, I went to work for International Harvester Company out of the Wichita, Kansas branch.
Let's talk about Marlow about 1928. That was just before, you were in high school then, and that was just before the Depression. Why don't you describe Marlow as you first remember it about 1928?
Well, I really don't recall too much about Marlow. I was there at such a short time, and I went in there as being a preacher's son. I got a job working on a filling station right off to help pay my expenses, and then my senior year was spent there. 28 wasn't really the Depression year yet, I don't think. I think later on we went into the Depression years. And in fact, I saw more Depression years later on out at Elk City when the government was shooting cattle and the banks were closed and things of that nature. And
you moved to Elk City when about the time you were in college, is that correct?
Right.
And where were you going to school?
I went to school at OBU the last year I went to college. And
who was president of OBU then? Was Dr. Raley president then?
No.
Before him?
No, before Dr. Raley.
Uh-huh.
I can see him, but I can't call his name.
Why don't you describe OBU as it was in the 1930s?
OBU was, I don't know what the attendance was over there. OBU, of course, being a denominational school, had students there from all over the United States. I think sometime being is the fact that it was a denominational school, the honors kids in the world were sent there trying to kind of correct them. Me being a preacher's son, I was noted for being kind of honorary, and I ended up there for 1 year. The college has grown since that time and is now quite a well-known college and still attracts people from all over all the states in the Union, plus some foreign countries. And the fine arts department over there is very good. I was studying pre-med, and OBU at that time had a science department that was good in pre-med. And after my second year, which my second year was in college, was over there, but then I went to work to make more money so I could go another year. But after I went to work, I never did accumulate enough money, evidently, to go back to college. That was the end of my college career.
Do you recall the activities? Did they have a bison football team then?
Had a good football team and a very good track team. I don't know any of the fellas now that are not in touch with the fellas now that were on the track team or the football team, but we had a very active track team. In fact, we won a number of championships and a good basketball team. Our football team was good, but it wasn't of the class that we're used to seeing now. That was just getting started there.
What were the most popular the extracurricular activities there at OBU when you were there?
The most popular was track and baseball at that time. Basketball, I presume, would rate right up with them. Football was coming in and just beginning. Of course, back then the emphasis wasn't so much on football as it is today.
Now you were at OBU 1 year, 1931 and 32. What did you do after you left OBU?
I went to work for a while in Marlow, Oklahoma, and then I went to work in Elk City, Oklahoma.
What did you do in Marlow?
I worked in a filling station in Marlow and a book agency plant. By the way, it happened to be a Marlin Gas, E.W. Marlin station, which it was individually owned, but it was handled Marlin products. And I remember one time he came through there on a bus and on a visit and stopped at that small station, and I thought it was very nice of him to do that, to recognize small people. At that time he was very wealthy and very independent. And I remember his letterhead said, on his letterhead, we all used his letterheads, and said, out of the west came Marlin, showed a cowboy on a horse, and I remembered that. Of course, I was very young at that time.
How do you describe Mr. Marlin as you remember seeing him?
I remember he's a very modest fellow, very open, and was the type of person, when you met him, you trusted him and would immediately place all kind of confidence in him. He was also enthusiastic and optimistic about everything. He was the type of fellow that you couldn't keep from liking and respecting.
This was only about 4 years or less before he was elected governor. Was he, and hadn't he served in Congress before he was governor?
I'm not sure about that. I don't recall that, but I think that, like so many other things, I think politics is one of the things that ruined him. I think he made us a good governor, but at the same time, he neglected his business to the extent that you know what happened to him eventually. That I've always thought maybe that was part of it. Of course, I'm not smart enough to say for sure. I don't know for sure.
Now the Marlin later became the Conoco, or moved into the Conoco.
Right, Continental. It's what is known now as Continental Oil Company.
And have the same symbol too, that triangle.
Triangle symbol.
Do you recall in Marlow any people that you knew that or you met that who became in any way prominent or a part of later Oklahoma history?
No, sir, I don't. I don't recall anyone from there that made history.
Now you moved to Elk City in 1931, and why don't you talk about Elk City during this period, and talk particularly about the Depression and about what happened in Elk City during this period?
Well, at that time, we had about a 3-year drought, and no feed for the cattle, and no pasture for the cattle, and that's when the government got into the program of killing cattle. And I remember I went out south of town and watched them shoot cattle, and made quite an impression on me to see them butchering cattle and farmers hauling them in there. I don't know what they paid them for those cattle that they shot, but the government did pay them some money for them. And naturally they weren't not having any feed of any kind. Well, it was about the only thing they could do with it. And that was back when the Dust Bowl days had started. And I remember one time I had a brother-in-law that lived out on a farm out there just 2 miles from town. And we were sitting out there, and the linoleum in his kitchen got up to the top of the windowsill blowing, and looked out the door, and there was a trailer blew out clear across the highway. And my wife was feeling so sorry for him, we were going back to town. Yet when we got home, our back door had blown open, and so much sand and dust had blown in our little house that the fish had suffocated in the fish bowl. So that you can imagine how bad the dust and sand was in those days. During my stay in Elk City, also there was a time they had the bank moratorium. The banks closed. And to give you an idea of what, I was lucky, I guess, to have a job paying $60 a month, and that was a pretty good salary in those days. Of course, we had no hourly rates or anything of that nature, because working in a filling station, you work some pretty long hours. I don't know what it'd figure out on an hourly basis that our wages were, but that's about the history there. I did stay in Elk City long enough to get married, and was acquainted with a fellow with the International Harvester Company who traded with me there. And after he became assistant manager of a branch in Wichita, Kansas, he called me, and I went to work for Harvester Company in 1936 out of the Wichita branch and headquartered in Enid, Oklahoma.
How were you doing with them?
I was known, at that time I started out on truck sales. A year later I was known as called a blockman. Now I think they call them territory managers, but I was a blockman for a number of years. And I lived in Enid, and Alva, and Cherokee, and then back in Alva, and then to Winfield, Kansas, and then to Wichita, and then back to Winfield, and back to Wichita. And I was finished when I resigned from Harvester, I was sales promotion supervisor. And came to Medford and went into business for myself. Bought the dealership, the International Harvester dealership here in Medford, and ran that until I retired and sold out in 1962. Since that time, I've sold insurance and investments, and first one thing and another.
The swinging back into Elk City, but we want to explore the area a little bit more. Do you recall, can you think of people in Elk City who played a major role in the 1930s whose names ought to be mentioned, or whose works or something about them might be mentioned?
Walter Blackburn was well known out at Elk City. He was the mayor there and is well known all over the state of Oklahoma and other states. And my father-in-law, Paul Peeler, Sr., was well known. He ended up as national president of the National Grain Growers Association, and then after his retirement, he was made president of that. I can't think what is the name for it. Meritorious president. He was very active in the cooperative work there, and helped start the cooperative. And they served, I think, 5 towns out of there was involved, and Elk City was the headquarter town there, and that was where my wife was working there in the bookkeeping department when we got married there at the Elk City Cooperative.
Can you recall any events of Elk City in the 30s that would be of particular interest?
The ones that stand out in my mind is when the banks were closed, and also when government was killing the cattle. That was the outstanding deals. I can't, of course, that's bad things to remember, but I can't remember anything particular other than outstanding other than that. I'm probably not thinking very good.
Well, can you think in terms of exploring these two items a little bit, how the bank moratorium affected individuals? Can you think of any specific illustrations of individual experiences that might show how the bank moratorium affected them?
Well, there was no warning when the banks closed. They just didn't open one morning, and people were all excited. Of course, then they knew that it was a kind of a national deal. They weren't so excited about their personal investment, their personal deposits, so they figured they'd get them back. It wasn't an individual bank deal. I know the fellows that I worked for at that time were bought live chickens, and through some way they went to Oklahoma City and got cash and advertised in the paper that they'd pay cash for chickens. And we loaded out 3 carloads of chickens, live chickens, during this moratorium because we had the cash money to pay for them. Of course, we managed with each car would accompany those chickens to Chicago or wherever they were sold. But due to the lack of money and everything, well, 2 days is all it took to load those 3 cars. And I forget now how many chickens are on a car, but there's quite a few.
Now, this was this the state moratorium that preceded the national one? This was Governor Murray's moratorium?
I don't know which was it. At that time.
You remember there was a state one, or Governor Murray?
Yeah, I remember. I know that when the banks closed all over Oklahoma, and I don't know whether it's national or not. Maybe it's just an Oklahoma deal.
They had an Oklahoma moratorium.
That could have been the one I'm thinking about.
And there was a national one right after the inauguration in 33.
I'm not. My memory doesn't serve me that well.
This is an interesting experience. It's exactly the sort of thing I'm looking for. Do you recall any other specific experiences dealing with moratorium?
No, not particular. I know the bank called us and wanted to talk to me. His name's Pete Thurman, who's had quite a history out there of the Thurman banks over the state. I want to know where we got the money, and of course I didn't know. My boss went to Oklahoma City and got that. His name Kelly. He was the largest independent chicken buyer in the world, so he had some kind of connections where he could get this money, and he did it.
You don't even know now, do you?
No, I don't know now. He went to Oklahoma City and got the cash money to pay for the chickens, and I was a cashier, and they'd bring the tickets up from freight cars or chicken cars that they had. They had special cars for live chicken. They'd bring it up at the service station, and my cash went into there. I paid cash for the chickens. So we felt like we were big shots, and we were handling the money, and the bankers wondered when they could open up.
Your descriptions on the dust storm are very good, too, because you give me specifics of things that happen. Can you think of any other dust storm experiences, such as the ones you gave me, that you would lend some breadth to how it affected the people?
Well, after those dust storm days out there, later on, why, in 1937 and, 37 and 38 were still dust storm days, and I was working the Western Oklahoma Territory for Harvester, headquartered in Alva, and I've seen the lights go off in Laverne, Oklahoma one day at noon because they came on automatically when it got so dark, and it got that dark from the dark dust that blew in out there. Of course, this was back before air conditioning, and we had little children, and we'd have to hang wet blankets in the windows and to even get a little air and to hold that dust out. And there was a lot of people, youngsters, died with dust pneumonia back in those days. And I'd be driving down the road, and the static electricity would cut my motor just as if you'd cut the key. And well, to give you an idea how things were during that time, about 13 dealers that I had in my territory, 9 of them were on COD because they'd gone through this drought for a number of years. But thank goodness, after staying out there 5.5 years when I left, well, I had 15 dealers and none of them was on COD, so we made a rapid recovery.
There was a lot of migration west during the period of the dust storm. Did you see or experience, or can you recall anything that would tell of the migration away, those who moved out?
The only thing I can recall is the number of people and how they'd packed to get to see our station there at Elk City was on Highway 66 going west to California, and that's where so many of them were trying to migrate to. And different kinds of vehicles and things they used, and a short amount of money they had to go on. They'd conjure a gun or leave a gun with you for the gasoline to get them a little further on, and sometimes you'd have to take up a little collection to feed their families, and it was I don't know, if you think back on it now and the way people live today, it's just no way to compare it. It's our younger people today, I wish there'd been a movie made of a lot of that stuff. They wouldn't believe it though, but at least they'd have it in black and white so they could see it.
Might affect some attitudes.
That's right. That's right. Well, everybody that could work worked in those days, and even though their wages weren't good, each person had a job. In other words, the government came in with the WPA projects and made work, government made work, and they had foremen over those, and there was a lot of good done by WPA work. I believe it's better than strict hands out, because you can see bridges, parks, and roads, and so forth and so on that have been built by WPA. I hope we don't have to go back to it, but it beats a dole, I think. I think that each able-bodied person should have to work for the money that they get.
Now you went from Elk City to Enid, and that was when this was a transfer when you went with the International Harvester. Is that correct?
Right.
Right. Why don't you talk a little about the International Harvester and that experience, things that you recall and your work with the company, or things you may recall about interesting experiences with farmers, customers, and that sort of thing.
Well, as a harvester representative, I went with the dealers to call on farmers a number of times on a lot of deals, just primarily to help them sell and to get them out in the country to calling on people. Of course, my deals were directly with the dealers as a representative for the company. We didn't have big tractors in those days like we have now, and our tractors, in fact, have been assisted. I can remember before we had rubber-tired tractors. They were all steel wheel. Now, this was part of my going to work for Harvester. They'd already started out a few tractors on rubber at that time. But about the biggest tractor made in those days, unless it was the old steam tractors, which were discontinued, the Titans and some of those older ones, were about 3 bottoms. It was about as 14-inch bottoms or 3 16-inch bottoms was about as big a tractor as most farmers had. Of course, today that they're pulling 8 and 10 bottoms, but for the same token, a tractor back then cost $1,400. Now then they're going up to $35,000 and $40,000 a piece, and they got cabs, air conditioning, tape decks and everything on them, and we had steel wheels with lugs and steel steering wheels, so you can see there's been quite a difference in that. And combines, of course, back then that was more or less, we're experimenting with a self-propelled combine. I can remember the switch from the pull machine to the bulky self-propelled, which has been streamlined since then. And at the time, I thought that was too much money involved in a machine that a farmer would only use for 2 weeks out of the year, and it wouldn't last forever. But it's gotten to where it's been a big business, and I was just as wrong as I could be. I figured you could buy a pull machine and a tractor for what a self-propelled combine would bring, and that tractor would be used lots more often and more than a combine's used. But I was wrong. Anymore, farming is a big business, and it takes a lot of equipment and a lot of money to do it.
What all equipment did International have at that time? Was the tractor the main item?
Well, they had a full line. Back in those days, we sold grain binders, and we sold the small combines, and we sold pull combines primarily. And I remember when our first self-propelled came out, the harvester company at that time made a full line of farm machinery, even the cream separator for taking care of dairies. It was just about anything a farmer used, they made, especially for his crop work. Cultivators and plows and harrows and whatever, you name it, and they had it.
Why don't you describe Enid in the late 1930s?
Well, being traveling, well, you just really didn't get connected with the cities you lived in or the towns you lived in like you would like I have here in Medford, because you come in on weekends and travel the rest of the time. So I really didn't get into the life of Enid very much. It was just a big country town, and still is, as far as I'm concerned, with the courthouse and stuff on the square. And of course, Enid has grown like so many of our towns, and is a good town. It's located in an agricultural area, and of course, they depend on a lot of smaller outlying areas like Medford puts a lot of their business, and has a big trade territory. But like I say, at the time I was working for Harvest Company, I was just headquartered there, and just being in there on weekends, I didn't get involved in any of the city's activities.
Do you recall anything or any events in, say, Alva or Cherokee during the period you were there? Maybe something that happened or some special event that occurred, someone who came to the community of some importance.
I can't recall of anything of too much importance right now. I'm sure there's a lot of it happened, but I've gone blank. I just don't, I can't think of it.
Now, you came to Medford in 1946. What brought you here?
I went into business for myself. Bought the International Harvester dealership here.
You found it better, I presume, more profitable to be a dealer than to be bossing dealers.
Well, it depended on how hard you wanted to work. Now, and depended on a lot of things it depended on. I had a young family, and I felt like if I was ever going to be a father to them, I needed to stay home a while. So I went in business primarily for that reason, so I could be home before I worked day and night. So I don't know whether that helped a whole lot or not, but I did work long enough and stayed in business long enough to have my 3 kids through college, and have one boy that's a dentist, and I have one son that's a minister. And of course, my daughter is a housewife and has done some work, but they all have their college education. Of course, the DDS has his doctorate degree, and my youngest boy, who's a minister, is working on his doctorate degree now.
What are your children's names?
The Barbara is the daughter's name, Barbara Allen, and the son's named Thomas Howell Hall Jr., and then Larry Everett Hall is the minister, the younger.
Let's talk a little about Medford. Now, you did become involved in the community when you came to Medford, and you were involved with the chamber and other things. Why don't you let's first talk about Medford in 1946. As it was then.
When I came to Medford in 1946, it was, I don't know how to describe it. It had been just about status quo for a number of years. It wasn't growing. It was still a good, substantial town, and people were well satisfied with what was going on. In fact, the business is sometimes growth isn't desirable. A lot of people don't care for growth because it brings in different elements and different things that you have to put up with, and cause you to have expansions and housing and so forth and so on. It seemed like the people in Medford were happy with their situation, but as the other towns grew, why, we saw that we needed to do some things, and that's the reason the Chamber of Commerce was formed and organized, and to help build up a trade territory and to do promotional work. And also we used the Chamber as a avenue or a place, a source of information for prospective new businesses that we called on. And as you know, it's right now our business is expanded to where we have a number of organizations.
Why don't we talk about what was involved in the organization of the Chamber of Commerce, and possibly whether you had any opposition to maybe from some who maybe were opposed to promotion?
We had some opposition, and you always have opposition for change. And we, in fact, the business is, we had representatives from the Chamber of Commerce at Enid that voluntarily came up to help us and meet with us and tell the group that was called together what the Chamber of Commerce would do and what it was, and helped us to organize it. And at the meeting, there was 3 fellows popped up and wanted to know what our visiting guests would get out of the deal when they were up here strictly through friendship. And that's when I lost my temper and got them told off, and in fact left the meeting later on and come to find out that they decided to organize and elected me president after I'd gotten mad and popped off like I did.
The visiting guest was from where?
Enid.
From Enid.
Yes, from the Enid Chamber of Commerce.
Who was your visiting guest?
I don't know their names.
Remember?
I don't remember their names.
They were officers in
That
the
night,
Enid
officers in the Enid Chamber, and that was 1947, I think, and that's been quite a while ago. So I don't remember their names. I'm sorry.
Let's talk about those. You were president 2 years, is that right?
Right.
Why don't we talk about those 2 years and what happened?
Well, at that time, why anything we needed to do in a city was cleared through the chamber. We didn't have a city organization to speak of. In other words, a city manager or anything. So the Chamber of Commerce, more or less, was the deal. In other words, when we were bothered with mosquitoes, why the Chamber of Commerce promoted this.
Let's see. We were talking about the organization on.
Chamber did.
That's right.
That's right. And well, for instance, we had mosquitoes were bad, and we made arrangements to have the town sprayed, and then to build a park. We worked with some of the other clubs, ladies' clubs, and so forth and so on, and put in a lot of park equipment. Also put in a swimming pool. The chamber promoted a lot of that. We've had a secretary all this time that took care of the correspondence and so forth and so on, and inquires about our town. And our chamber's grown to the point now that we have a junior chamber, JC's. It's quite an active organization, and so we feel like that it's done some good. We had opposition to it. Anytime you do anything, you're going to have people that will oppose to it. In fact, not only that, when we went to city manager form of government, I think it was about 40% of the people opposed to that. They thought that the mayor and the city council should continue to do the work of the city for nothing, but I think it's proven, the facts have proven that it has paid to go to that type of government and have a full-time man because of the things that have been done there. We've fixed up a number of streets. We've made a number of capital improvements on equipment like new tractors. We inaugurated an ambulance service. We took care of our EPA requirements on our garbage and trash disposal. We built a new tennis court. This is in a span of 2.5 years, and that's more actually than, and I think I mentioned we established an ambulance service, city-owned ambulance service, and had training of the EMTs, and I don't think that could have been accomplished without somebody devoting full time to promoting it.
The getting back to the chamber, we were going back again to 46 and 7. Who were some of the early leaders in the chamber during this period? Some of the people who played a major role.
Mr. Fritz Califer, who's here now in the insurance business, was very active in the chamber, and he has served as president. Mr. Bill Fuss, who was a grocerman here at that time. Mr. Fuss is deceased now. He was president for one term back then. Had Harold Reed of the Grant County Bank, and Jack Stewart of Stewart Hardware was very active and served as president during this at one time. Most every businessman in town, active businessman in town, has served as president of the Chamber of Commerce since it started because of the activity there. And we've had to have the cooperation and activity of nearly all the business people in town. We don't have it all, but percentage-wise we do.
What do you think is the most important thing that the Chamber did during your 2 years of administration?
Chamber, well, we promoted trade days and got people coming to Medford by having farmers' days and different types of entertainment, and we had our spring shows and so forth and so on. Just a general promotion deal and advertising Medford.
In the total years of the Chamber, what would you say has been the biggest single thing the Chamber has done?
I think we've just welded a bunch of business people together better, and they understand each other's problems better and sit down and discuss them and figure out how to get them solved.
We were talking about what you thought might be the biggest project that the Chamber has done, the biggest single project in the years. Has the thought come to you what you think it might be?
No, nothing that you can see other than the fact that I do think that it's helped hold our town together, and like I said before, that it's united our businessmen together and more or less have the same goals, and helps us to accomplish things. If we didn't meet and discuss things, we'd never get done.
Do you recall any particular problems either in the general community or in the business community where you can specifically lay a finger to the role that the Chamber played?
The Chamber played a very active role in getting number 11 highway paved, running east and west, and helping secure right-of-way at that time. I don't think they do it that way now, but I know I worked on it, working west out of town, trying to get right-of-way, and that road now is used, believe it or not, more than 81 highway. The traffic's heavy on that because of Interstate 35 having been built east of here, 17 miles.
How'd you go about getting the right-of-way?
We've got some of it donated in some cases, which I don't think is fair. They paid for, and state helped pay for some of it, the county helped pay for some of it, and the Chamber did primarily legwork and very little money that we actually put out. Ours was mostly the legwork on the deal.
Why don't you tell about the things that brought about the movement into the city manager form of government?
Well, the city council and the mayor, any town needs somebody head of it, and we've had a good mayor and good organization as far as that's concerned, but they're all busy people, and there's so many things that come up under the present rules and regulations set down by the state and federal governments, that it takes a full-time person to meet those rules and regulations, like your garbage disposal and your trash, and so many other things that you have to do. And besides that, the government programs that are available with money, like your Parks Department and your Bureau of Outdoor Recreation, which is your Parks Department, and other federal organizations that no one had the time or the know-how to get to any of this money, government money, in these smaller towns. Nobody, and the fact is that it's still hard to get because we don't care enough political pull, but we do get some by working at it. Now, bigger towns have people on salary that know how to make applications for this money and qualify for it, where we didn't have anybody that had the time or the expertise to do it. And we now have an application in for some other grants, and I don't know just what they are. Since I've retired in October, I haven't been in town very much.
Now, how did it come about that you became the first city manager?
That is an embarrassing question, but I think I can answer that about as easy as anything. I was asked to serve, and I think it's because I worked cheap, and and they knew that I had the city's interest at heart, and they felt like I was capable of getting some of the things done. In fact, the business is with so many things that had just built up that it just was worrying them to death. In other words, our garbage. We've been threatened on being sued because our waste out there was washing out and poisoning cattle, and our streets were getting in bad shape, and a lot of our equipment was getting down to the point where it needed replacing, and we needed a filter system put into our swimming pool. And our building, if you've noticed, Medford, since you've been here, we've built a number of houses. We've had to extend water to all those places and then put in fire plugs and stuff, and And you've got to have some kind of rule or regulation to it. Even though we didn't have ordinances to cover it, we worked in conjunction with people to see that it was done more or less right, to where it will meet the regulations when they are approved.
Could you suggest what might be the most important thing, the thing you're the most proud of that happened during your 2-year period?
And the getting us, had to take over the ambulance operation, and we did get the training. I had the school here in Medford, and they had a good attendance, and we have a number of qualified EMTs to run the ambulance. We have our local city-owned ambulance service now. That is one of the things that's accomplished. Secondly, we got some Bureau of Outdoor Recreation grants, 50% matching grants, where we built, improved our park, and have new tennis courts, lighted, by the way. And also, we got a new airport with the FAA money that we have over $200,000 airport out here that we're very proud of. And those are some of the things that were accomplished and approved during my tenure as city manager.
Do you have a bicentennial program here now?
Yes, and frankly, I'm not very active in it, but Mrs. Pond is heading that up, and we have a number of them on there, and our mayor is very active in it. So, and as I say, since I retired, I haven't been here too much.
Can you, what would you say in your whole life has been the most exciting and interesting part of it?
Well, that question there is awful hard to pinpoint. I don't know what that answer would be. That'd take a lot of thought on that. I don't know, the challenge of working and providing a living and educating your children, I presume, and helping build a community would be my way of saying about all I can do. Of course, I've been active in church and have been on the building committee, and we built a new church.
What is your church?
My church is Baptist Church.
I would guess that.
And we have built, have quite a building we're pretty proud of. And I've been on the building committee on that ever since it started.
This has been an interview with Mr. T.H. Hall in Medford, Oklahoma, and we're interviewing on April the 8th of 1976.